Did you enjoy the properties Daniel left you? My mother asked casually over the phone, her voice light, almost distracted, as if she were asking about the weather. I froze, standing in the kitchen of the house I had just returned to after burying my husband that morning, my fingers still wrapped around a cold cup of coffee I had not touched. What properties? I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. Like something inside me already knew the answer would change everything. There was a pause, not long, but long enough to feel intentional, and then she said, "Oh, nothing, sweetheart. You should get some rest." That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make the silence in that house feel different, heavier, like it was hiding something I was not meant to see. If you have ever felt like the truth was right in front of you but no one would say it out loud, stay with me. And only if this story truly resonates with you, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing where you are watching from, your city, your country, and what time it is for you right now. I always find it incredible how far stories like this can reach. My name is Rachel Bennett. I am 34 years old. And the day I came home from my husband's funeral, I realized my own parents were hiding something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. But to understand how I got there, you need to know what that day felt like before the phone call, before the question, before everything started to unravel. The funeral had been quiet, smaller than I expected. The kind of quiet that lingers long after people leave, folding into the walls and settling into your chest in a way you cannot shake. I remember standing beside the casket, greeting people I barely recognized, nodding, thanking them, saying all the right things while feeling completely disconnected from my own voice. My parents were not there. They had called that morning, apologizing in a tone that sounded practiced, explaining they had a therapy appointment they could not reschedule, something about needing to process their grief in their own way. And I had accepted it because I did not have the energy to argue, not that day, not when I was trying to hold myself together in front of everyone else. But as the hours passed, their absence became louder than anything anyone said to me. It sat in every empty chair, in every glance from distant relatives who noticed, in every quiet moment where I found myself looking toward the door, expecting them to walk in late, to at least try, and they never did. By the time I drove home, the sky already dimming into that soft gray that comes just before evening, I told myself I would not think about it, that I would deal with it later. That grief had a way of distorting everything, and maybe I was being unfair. But then the phone rang, and everything I had pushed aside came rushing back in a way that felt too precise to be accidental, too controlled to be innocent. And as I stood there in that kitchen, replaying her words over and over in my mind, I realized something I had not allowed myself to consider before. This was not just about what they did not show up for. It was about what they knew and had chosen not to tell me. And for the first time since I lost Daniel, the pain in my chest was not just grief, it was something colder, sharper. A quiet understanding that whatever came next would not be simple, and it would not be kind. The house felt different that evening, not just quiet but carefully quiet, like every sound had been lowered on purpose, and I started to notice things I had not paid attention to before, small details that did not belong to grief but to something else entirely. The way my father's study door was slightly open when it was usually closed, the faint glow of a desk lamp still on inside even though no one had mentioned working, the way my mother's voice on the phone had shifted too quickly from casual to dismissive the moment I asked a simple question. And I realized that grief does not create secrets like this, it exposes them. I set my cup down and walked slowly down the hallway, not because I was trying to overhear anything, but because something in me needed to confirm that I was not imagining it, that the unease settling in my chest had a reason. As I passed by the study, I heard my father's voice, low but clear enough to make out certain words, numbers, properties, paperwork, and then my mother's voice followed, sharper this time, saying, "She still does not know, and we need to keep it that way until everything is finalized." And my steps stopped without me meaning them to, my hand resting lightly against the wall as if I needed something solid to hold on to. I should have walked away. I should have respected the boundary of a conversation that was not meant for me. But there are moments when instinct overrides everything else, when your body understands the truth before your mind is ready to accept it. And I stayed there, completely still, listening. My father sighed and said something about timing, about how the funeral had complicated things but also given them space, and then he mentioned Daniel's name, not with sadness, not with respect, but as part of a discussion that sounded transactional, detached, as if my husband's life had been reduced to a series of assets to be managed, and something inside me tightened, not loudly, not explosively, just enough to make it hard to breathe normally. My mother said they had done what was necessary, that everything was already in motion, and that once the paperwork was complete, there would be no way for it to be questioned, and that was the moment the pieces began to align in a way I could not ignore. The missed funeral, the vague explanations, the sudden change in tone, the question about properties I supposedly had. It was not confusion, it was a system, something planned, something deliberate, and I stepped back quietly before the floor could creak under my weight, before they could realize I was there, before I became part of the conversation they were trying to control. I returned to the kitchen and sat down slowly, staring at the same untouched cup of coffee, but now it felt like I was looking at an entirely different life, one where I had been kept in the dark on purpose, one where the people I trusted most had made decisions that did not include me. And for a long moment I did nothing. I did not cry, I did not react, because reacting would have meant accepting the version of events they expected from me: confusion, dependence, vulnerability. But instead, I let the silence settle around me again, this time with clarity, because now I knew something they did not know. I knew there was more to this story than what I had been told, and that meant I had a choice. I could confront them and risk losing control of whatever truth was being hidden, or I could wait, watch, and understand exactly what they had done before making a single move. And as I sat there, listening to the quiet house that no longer felt like a place of comfort, I made a decision that felt colder than anything I had ever done before. I would not ask them for the truth, I would find it myself. I did not sleep that night, not really. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every word I had heard, every pause, every shift in tone, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that this was not something recent. This had been unfolding long before Daniel passed, long before the funeral, long before I ever had a reason to question the people I trusted, and by morning, the grief that had filled my chest the day before had changed into something quieter but far more focused. I moved through the house carefully, aware of every sound, every movement, making sure I did not draw attention to myself. My parents acted normal, almost too normal. My mother asked if I had eaten. My father mentioned errands he needed to run, their voices calm, controlled, as if nothing had shifted at all, and that was what confirmed it for me, because when people are hiding something, they do not overreact, they stabilize. They create a version of normal that feels just believable enough to avoid questions. I nodded, answered simply, and watched, because now I understood that every interaction mattered. Every detail could mean something. Later that morning, I found myself standing in front of Daniel's office, a space I had not had the strength to enter since he passed. The door slightly open, sunlight cutting across the desk where he used to work, everything still exactly where he left it. His laptop, a stack of papers, a pen resting beside a notebook filled with his handwriting. And for a moment the weight of losing him returned in a way that almost made me forget everything else, but I pushed through it, because whatever truth I was looking for was connected to him, to what he had left behind. I stepped inside and closed the door gently behind me. The quiet inside the room felt different from the rest of the house, more honest somehow, like nothing here had been rearranged to hide anything. I sat at his desk and opened the notebook first, scanning pages of notes that did not immediately make sense, numbers, addresses, short reminders, things he never had the chance to explain. And then I noticed something small but important, a folded piece of paper tucked between two pages, not hidden but not obvious either, the kind of place you would leave something you intended to come back to. I unfolded it carefully, my hand steady even though my heart was not, and what I saw made everything slow down for a second. It was a list: properties, locations, values, each one written clearly, deliberately, and at the bottom, a number that did not feel real at first: $8.5 million, and I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to understand how something this significant could exist without me knowing. How Daniel could have built something like this and never told me, or worse, how someone else could have known and decided I did not need to. I looked closer, recognizing some of the addresses: Manhattan, places he had mentioned in passing but never explained in detail, investments I had assumed, something distant, not something that would ever become part of my life, and yet here it was, written in his handwriting, connected directly to him, and suddenly my mother's question did not feel strange anymore. It felt precise, intentional, like she had been testing what I knew and confirming what I did not. I leaned back slowly in the chair, the paper still in my hands, and for the first time, the full weight of what I had overheard settled into something undeniable. This was not confusion. This was not a misunderstanding. This was something that had been kept from me on purpose, something that involved decisions, documents, timing, and control. And as I sat there in that room that still felt like him, I realized that whatever my parents were doing, they were counting on one thing above all else: that I would remain exactly who they believed I was, someone who would not question, someone who would not look deeper, someone who would accept whatever version of the truth they chose to give me. And that was the one thing I could no longer afford to be. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into the notebook exactly where I had found it, not because I was afraid of losing it, but because I understood something now that I had not understood before. This was not about reacting, it was about timing, and whatever my parents were doing, they believed they were ahead of me, they believed I was still in the dark, and that was the only advantage I had. So I left the office the way I entered it, quiet, controlled, leaving everything untouched, as if I had never been there at all. The rest of the day unfolded in a way that felt almost unreal. My mother moved around the house making dinner, humming softly, asking me if I preferred chicken or pasta, as if we were living inside a version of normal that had never been interrupted. My father came and went, checking his watch more often than usual, taking calls he did not explain, stepping outside to finish conversations he clearly did not want me to hear. And I watched all of it, without asking a single question, because now every answer mattered too much to risk too early. That evening, as we sat at the table, my mother brought up practical things, bills, insurance, paperwork that needed to be handled after Daniel's passing, her tone gentle, almost supportive, but there was something underneath it, something structured, like she was guiding me toward a version of events that had already been decided. She mentioned that they could help manage things, that it might be easier if they handled certain documents for me, that I should not have to deal with all of it alone, and I nodded slowly, pretending to consider it because on the surface it sounded reasonable, even kind, but now I knew better. Now I could hear the intention behind the words, the careful positioning, the subtle redirection. My father added that legal matters can be complicated, that it would be best to trust people with experience, people who understood how these processes worked, and for a brief moment I almost admired how seamless it was, how easily they could present control as support, how naturally they could step into a space that was never meant to belong to them. I kept my voice steady when I spoke, thanking them, telling them I appreciated the help, agreeing just enough to make them believe I was still exactly who they thought I was, someone overwhelmed, someone dependent, someone who would not question the details, and I could see it in their expressions, the slight easing of tension, the unspoken confirmation that their plan was still intact, that nothing had shifted, but everything had shifted, just not in the way they expected. Later that night, when the house finally quieted again, I sat in the living room with my phone in my hand, staring at Daniel's contact information for a long time before scrolling further down to a name I had never needed before, his attorney, someone he had mentioned only once in passing, someone I had not thought about until now, and for a second, I hesitated, not because I doubted what I had seen, but because I understood that once I made this call, there would be no going back to not knowing, no returning to the version of reality my parents were trying to maintain. And then I dialed, listening to the ringing on the other end, each second stretching longer than it should, until a calm, professional voice answered, introducing himself, and I said my name, explaining who I was, explaining why I was calling, and there was a pause, not confusion, not surprise, but recognition, the kind that settles into place when something expected finally happens. And he said something that made the room feel even quieter than before. He said he had been wondering when I would call, and in that moment I understood that whatever my parents had planned, whatever they believed they could control, they were not the only ones who knew the truth. And for the first time since this all began, I felt something close to certainty, not about how it would end, but about one thing that mattered more than anything else. I was no longer alone in it. The lawyer did not rush his words, and that alone told me everything I needed to know, because people who are hiding something tend to speak quickly, but people who are holding the truth speak with intention. He explained that Daniel had prepared everything carefully, that nothing had been left incomplete, that the assets I had seen were only part of a larger structure designed to protect me, and as he spoke, I felt something steady begin to replace the uncertainty that had followed me since the funeral. He confirmed the amount, $8.5 million, along with 6 properties in Manhattan, each one legally documented, each one tied directly to Daniel's name and designated for me, not managed by anyone else, not shared, not conditional, but mine fully and clearly. And for a moment I closed my eyes, not out of disbelief, but because I needed to understand the weight of what that meant, not just financially but emotionally, because this was not just about money, this was about trust, about intention, about the fact that Daniel had made sure I would be taken care of even in his absence. And yet the people who were supposed to support me had chosen to stand between me and that security. The lawyer continued, explaining that there had been attempts to initiate temporary control over certain documents, requests that suggested I was not in a position to manage things myself, that I might need assistance, and as he said it, I could hear the careful phrasing, the legal precision, but underneath it was something much simpler. Someone had tried to take control of what did not belong to them. I asked him one question, my voice calm, steady, the same way I had learned to speak when everything inside me was shifting. I asked if anything had been finalized, and he paused just long enough to let the answer settle before he gave it. No, nothing had been completed, because certain confirmations required my direct authorization, and that was when I understood the full extent of what my parents had been counting on. They believed I would remain uninformed long enough for them to guide the process, to position themselves in a way that would make it difficult to reverse. They had not planned for me to ask questions. They had not planned for me to listen, and they had not planned for Daniel to have prepared things so carefully that their access could not be secured without me. I thanked the lawyer, not with emotion but with clarity, and we arranged to meet the next day, to review everything properly to make sure every detail was exactly as it should be. And when the call ended, I sat there in the quiet living room, the house still and familiar in a way that no longer felt comforting, and I realized something that changed the way I saw everything around me. My parents were not reacting to loss, they were responding to opportunity, and that difference mattered more than anything else because it meant their actions were not accidental, they were intentional, and intention can be understood, anticipated, and if necessary undone. I stood up slowly, looking around the room that had once felt like home, and for the first time since I arrived, I did not feel like I was inside their space. I felt like I was observing it from the outside, seeing it clearly, without attachment, without expectation, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I would not confront them, not yet, because confrontation would only give them time to adjust, to explain, to reshape the narrative in a way that protected them. Instead, I would move quietly the same way they had, but with one difference. I was not trying to take something that did not belong to me. I was simply taking back what was already mine. In the weeks that followed, life did not suddenly become perfect, but it became something I had not felt in a long time, clear, steady, and entirely my own. I met with the lawyer, reviewed every document, signed what needed to be signed, and quietly secured everything Daniel had left for me. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with certainty. My parents tried to continue as if nothing had changed, offering help, asking careful questions, watching me for signs of confusion that never came, and when they realized that I understood more than they expected, something shifted in them too, not regret but distance, as if they no longer knew how to approach a version of me they could not control. I did not argue, I did not explain, because I no longer needed them to understand. I moved into one of the properties Daniel had invested in, a quiet space overlooking the city, where the noise of everything that happened felt far enough away to finally breathe. And for the first time since I lost him, I felt something close to peace, not because the past had changed, but because I learned that boundaries are not something you announce, they are something you live. They are the quiet decisions you make when you stop allowing others to rewrite your story. And if you are listening to this and you have ever felt like the people closest to you are quietly working against you, I want you to know that you are not powerless, even when it feels that way. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step back, see clearly, and choose yourself without needing permission. Healing does not always come from fixing what was broken. Sometimes it comes from walking away from what was never whole to begin with. Thank you for being here with me, for listening, for staying through a story that was not easy to tell. It means more than you might think, and I would love to know, have you ever had to discover the truth about someone you trusted the most, and how did it change you? And if this story truly resonates with you, you can support it with a like or a subscription, but only if it feels right to you. My name is Rachel Bennett. I am 34 years old. And the lesson I want to leave you with is this: your silence does not mean you are weak, it means you are waiting for the right moment to take your life back.